No one cared who I was till I put on the mask.
He won't be dining with us tonight. He hopes you'll understand.
Of course. I do usually make it a point to know who I'm working for.
I call it Starro the Conqueror. That's meant to be derisive.
Join me, and with our powers combined, we could finally end all the pain, all the suffering, the destruction they bring.
There are 2 more stones on Earth. Find them, my children, and bring them to me on Titan.
Father, we will not fail you.
Having trouble. Take a seat. Have a drink.
Imagine you are Batman. You're exhausted from having faced numerous escaped criminals, coming home to your secret cave and/or manor, only to find Bane, a hulking behemoth of a man, waiting to greet you. That would be terrifying, and that is exactly what happens in Batman number 497. Bane had organized a prison breakout in a secret attempt, sort of, to exhaust the Batman, to wind him down and break him down. So now, when this worn down, caught off guard Batman watches as Bane pumps himself full of venom, the very thing that Bruce is also suffering withdrawals from, and is talking about how Bruce Wayne is just a mask, but a useless one, but his mask is very much useful, and then he's like, so you are familiar with venom, then you know what it can do. And he explains how his venom is way more potent, and then Batman gets a bit of a good speech, I'll give him that, it was pretty good, and he jumps into combat, and Bane's just nope, and he gives Batman an absolute thrashing. He's throwing Batman around and beating the tar out of the guy, and Batman is reliving all of his beatings up until this point, but they're nothing like this, and Alfred literally can't even handle it, and he goes crawling off to get the Bat family, and Batman is so exhausted that he can only try to dodge or just take the hits, but he goes to punch Bane, and it's nothing, and then Bane's you are already broken, and then Bane just wipes the floor, the ceilings, the walls with Bruce Wayne, breaks his back, and then he leaves him destroyed on the ground. It's sick, and it's sick and twisted, but it's awesome. Next up today, the Wolverine villain Cyber is, in my opinion, kind of underrated, but he's one of the only villains to actually terrify the mutant, with some adamantium-coated skin, toxic claws, and the power to track an individual's brain. Oh, and he's 9 feet tall and massive. In 1994's Wolverine number 79, Cyber is tracking down Wolverine in order to claim his adamantium bones, which he wants to then make a profit from. Unfortunately, at this time, Wolverine actually doesn't have the adamantium fused to his bones. So when the fight leads to him popping his bone claws, Cyber is a little bit disappointed. But instead of just walking away after this revelation, a cannon goes off nearby, and this gives Wolverine the opportunity to slash Cyber across the face. But as soon as the attack happens, Cyber catches Wolverine's fist, and in one stomp, he snaps Wolverine's claws in half. This event scarred Wolverine, but right after it, even made him question his ability as a hero without his adamantium. Marvel's Civil War number 2 is not the greatest, and it makes Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, to be someone who is just pretty unlikable. She just makes really weird decisions that get people hurt badly, like taking her ultimates, admittedly a pretty powerful team, to take on Thanos thanks to an inhuman precognitive telling her that he will be there. Thanos shows up looking for the cosmic cube, which isn't actually on Earth, and Carol's tactic of just hit him as hard as you can, as fast as you can, probably sounds good, but it's also not really a plan at all. Carol absorbs an energy blast, the Human Torch is able to hit him with some fire, She-Hulk gets to pin him down, giving Carol and Dazzler the chance to blast him, and War Machine gets to lay down some fire. Thanos, sure, he's a little bruised, but he is a-okay, because when the Inhuman Medusa tries to use her hair to bind Thanos, he grabs that hair and flings her straight into War Machine, who accidentally fires a missile at She-Hulk. Then, in the chaos following that explosion, Thanos springs on War Machine, punching him straight through the chest with his massive, Mad Titan purple grimace fist. Then, the Ultimates are able to hit Thanos hard enough to end the fight. fight, but damn. Now listen nerds, I gotta be honest, I never realized how vicious the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles can actually be. Taking place in IDW's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles issue number 44, the Turtles got split up. Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raph are on a mission to stop Krang from literally destroying all life on Earth using the Technodrome, leaving Donatello alone with his bow staff, facing off against Bebop and Rocksteady, who were given orders to send Donnie to the grave. Now that bow staff gets maybe one hit in before Rocksteady uses a sledgehammer to send Donnie flying, and Bebop just snaps the staff in half over his knee. Even with some assistance from Metalhead, Donnie is still at a disadvantage, and as he tries to escape, he gets a TV chucked at him, and then he gets slapped across the face with a computer keyboard. Then the pair just go to town on the lone turtle before Rocksteady uses that sledgehammer to crack open Donnie's shell. It is brutal. Luckily though, they are called off before they can fully finish the job. In the Infinite Crisis event, Connor Kent decides to answer the door, only to find Superboy Prime, who is starting to go a little bit off the deep end, and he decides to explain how he is the one true Superboy, and he wants to do that by fighting. And it is intense. Even Crypto gets involved, receiving a kick to the neck from Superboy Prime, and after that little crime against humanity, things get real. Prime beats the snot out of Connor Kent, chucking cars and all manner of things, but Connor had called in the Teen Titans, who in turn call in the Justice Society and the Doom Patrol. That's 28 different heroes. But this only makes things worse. Prime basically is like a kid, and he doesn't know how to control this power properly or even understand what is even happening right now. He starts wiping out heroes, accidentally taking the head off of Panther. He then rips off Risk's arm and wipes out Bushido and Baby Wildebeest with his heat vision while he is crying. It takes a handful of speedsters to then trap Prime in the Speed Force and end the fight. Okay, maybe a bit of a controversial pick here, but Superman Returns has made the list. The movie, I'm talking about the movie. Basically, Lex Luthor has used kryptonite to grow a massive landmass out in the ocean, which leaves Superman completely vulnerable. He lands on the new island, and it's bad news from the get-go. Lex and his goons have already gotten in position on this kind of Krypton-like island, but underneath, embedded into the rocks, is pure kryptonite. Tons of it. So it makes it incredibly easy for Lex Luthor to push Superman down these rocky stairs and then kick him while he's down, literally and figuratively. And then his goons start giving Superman this beating that actually kind of feels pretty scary and real, and I was like not expecting that at all. I don't think I've ever seen Superman so unable to do anything, and then Lex has like this sharp piece of kryptonite that he breaks off in this gasping for air Superman, who then falls off of a cliff. Moving on, John Walker, aka US Agent, is not the most loved character out there, but while he is a bit of like an anti-hero, he's still a hero from time to time. For example, when he answers the call to fight against Norman Osborn and his goons during the events of Siege. In the Mighty Avengers number 36, he attempts to stop the Thunderbolts from stealing Odin's spear. Unfortunately, another USA affiliated bad guy who is slightly crazy is also on the field today, and his name is Nuke, and he is pretty ruthless. Nuke is able to use the spear against US Agent, slicing off both his left arm and left leg. US Agent would go on to be wheelchair bound, refusing any enhanced cybernetics, and somehow he was still actually pretty capable. Moving on to the third spot today, Atlas is a character for DC Comics created by Jack Kirby, joining the comics in the 70s. He was always intended as a kind of anti-hero, and he has more or less played out that way since. But in 2010, Atlas was brainwashed by an unknown villain to attack the Justice League, and he is one of the few characters to absolutely pummel the tar out of Superman. Sure, Superman could be slightly holding back against this fellow hero, but I've always kinda hated that argument because then it makes me think that Superman is just faking it when he gets absolutely rocked, and I feel like that's not the case here. Atlas is taking Superman to the cleaners. They're going hit for hit, but Superman, even with help, he just can't take it, and Atlas eventually knocks him down to the concrete. Now, coming up second to last today, following the events of Original Sin, where Thor becomes unworthy to wield Mjolnir, Odin's son attempts to continue his superhero career in Thor #1. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't really turn out too well for him when the axe, Jarnbjorn, proves to be a pretty poor substitute for his mighty hammer. In battle with Malekith the Accursed and the Frost giants, Thor has his arms severed off with his own axe, and he's left to perish at the bottom of the ocean. The new female Thor, who's actually Jane Foster, becomes the wielder of Mjolnir, and it is up to her to defeat Malekith. The original Thor does return with a new metal arm made out of black uru, and initially he wants his hammer back, but then he sees Jane Foster handling it pretty well, and he just decides to drop the Thor title completely and just goes by Odin's son instead. The man was crushed. And finally, in the infamous A Death in the Family story, DC not only slew a Robin, but they did it in the most disturbing way they could have. Jason Todd had disobeyed direct orders from Bruce Wayne to not go near the Joker. The problem was that Jason had just met his birth mother for the first time, who it turned out was a criminal working for the Joker. Also, he's Jason Todd, so he just didn't listen. He went to the warehouse where the Joker and his goons were at with the intention of saving his mom. But in a heartbreaking turn of events, his own mom betrayed him to the Joker to save herself, which of course doesn't actually save her at all. And the Joker leaves her to pass away with Jason anyways. Joker is shown repeatedly beating the snot out of Jason Todd with a crowbar. It's harrowing. Joker leaves him suffering on the brink with an explosive device, and the hero manages to push through his injuries to get to the door with the help of his mom, only to find out that the Joker had locked them both inside.
These two faced off in Wolverine Volume 3, Issue 31 during the Enemy of the State story arc. We're talking about Gorgon and Wolverine. Now, Gorgon is known for being a fearsome villain who can, as his codename implies, turn his enemies to stone with just one simple little glance. In fact, Gorgon has actually successfully killed Wolverine before. That's just how even of a match this was going into it. He then had Wolverine resurrected and brainwashed him so that he might use him as his own assassin, turning him against his friends and colleagues in the hero community. I hate when that happens. In the end though, Wolverine got him back. During their fight in issue number 31, Wolverine seems to take a page out of Perseus's book. He defeats Gorgon using his own claws to reflect his own gaze back onto himself. Genius. Turning Gorgon into stone before then shattering him into a million pieces. You're not coming back from that easy.
The villain known as Mr. Mxyzptlk is technically a bad guy, but he's more just a reality warping nuisance for the Man of Steel, and he absolutely did not deserve what happened to him in Superman Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. In the story, a wide array of Superman's villains all make their play on the Man of Steel, and after he naturally defeats everyone, he is still left wondering who organized all these ne'er-do-wells. Turns out it was Mr. Mxyzptlk. Mr. Mix reveals himself and goes on a villain monologue about how basically he has lived for a long time and he's kind of bored of being mischievous, so now he wants to be evil, and his first evil act will be taking out Superman himself. The fifth dimensional imp then reveals his monstrous true form and goes on the attack. Now luckily for Supes, he grabbed the Phantom Zone projector and he used it on the villain, but at the same time, trying to escape, Mr. Mix spoke his name backwards. With both things happening at the same time, Mxyzptlk was completely torn in half between both the Phantom Zone and the fifth dimension.
This one was a disturbing, heart-wrenching, and shocking moment from Season 1 of Peacemaker, a series that surprised me in so many ways, and in so many of them delightful ones. One such startling moment happens when Peacemaker is forced to face off against his dad, White Dragon. While we know pretty early on that Peacemaker's dad, Augie Smith, is pretty much the worst role model or parent anyone could ask for, we also see that Chris Smith, aka Peacemaker, still cares deeply for his father, despite all the awful things his dad has done to him. Rather than rightfully blame his father for his messed up upbringing, Chris seems to just blame himself almost just as much, if not actually more, making the moment when he actually faces his father a tense one. Years of pent-up rage, disappointment, shame, and frustration manifest in a single instant when White Dragon goads his son into killing him, commenting on the fact that he doesn't believe his son is in essence strong enough to even do so, and in the process causing Peacemaker to snap, resulting in him doing just that, killing his own supervillain father.
Rudolph Jones found himself exposed to a strange form of radiation which changed him into the bald, green-skinned parasite with the ability to absorb the life and energy of others. In Firestorm, the Nuclear Man, issue number 86, Parasite is released from an area he is being held in and goes on a rampage, draining multiple people of their life energy, including Firehawk, who fell pretty easily to this villain. Now luckily the hero Firestorm is nearby. At this point in time, Firestorm has become the world's fire elemental and received a pretty significant power boost. Firestorm comes in hot literally on Parasite with a blast of flame, and then when Parasite tries to drain Firestorm's power, the hero is completely unaffected. He delivers this cold line about how he himself is just straight up power incarnate, and in a desperate effort, Parasite tries to trade energy blasts with Firestorm. Unfortunately for Parasite, it is nowhere near an equal fight. He uses up all the energy he took, and then just trying to hold back Firestorm's blasts, Parasite goes through his own reserved energy as well, to the point that he is on the brink. He even starts to beg Firestorm to stop, but he had every intention of taking Parasite's life until his friends show up and pull him back. It's actually a really dark scene.
In issue 116 of Spectacular Spider-Man, Peter crosses paths with, get this, Sabretooth, when he shows up to attack Black Cat, who had just escaped the Foreigner's clutches. Sabretooth was sent to make her pay, and while Felicia doesn't seem to be too afraid of Sabretooth's threats to skin her alive, Spider-Man returns just as Victor is set to pounce. The two tussle, and Peter leaves Victor crying out when he shoots him in the face with webbing. Victor rips it off his face, in the process doing damage with his own claws, even though Peter tried to warn him to not do that, proving that not only is Spider-Man stronger than Sabretooth this time around, but he also seems to be quite a bit smarter here too.
In Spawn number 27, we learn of Philip Kron, who has spent his entire life studying the occult so that one day he could gain access to heaven. Now I'm not really sure that's how that works, but either way. Calling himself the Curse, Philip decided the best thing to do in his heavenly endeavor would be to bring down the Hellspawn Al Simmons. Now Spawn was an agent of heaven at that point and was imbued with mystical energy, which Philip would then siphon off for himself. But because he is clearly no match for Spawn, Philip goes with a complete sneak attack on Simmons, blowing a hole clear through Spawn's chest. Unsurprisingly, Spawn wasn't especially pleased about being ambushed, so he tracks down the Curse and blasts off his bionic arm. The two then engaged in a battle, but since Spawn was at full power and the Curse was just a crazy guy in a costume, he didn't really last very long at all. Spawn beat the absolute beans out of the Curse and then strung up his almost lifeless body against a wall in an alleyway to ward off any further enemies. That would have resulted in Philip's passing, but his fate was somehow even worse later on. You'll have to read for that one.
This one is truly brutal and devastating for me because, in a way, Starro was quite a misguided villain. In James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, Starro is cast in the role of antagonist, but Starro is not malicious here per se, or at least not malicious without cause, let's just say that. Starro is an alien who was captured and used for various experiments as part of Project Starfish. The Suicide Squad has been sent in to shut down said project after the United States learned of how dangerous the project could be if unleashed on the entire world. When the team finally uncover the truth behind Project Starfish, it's too late and they accidentally unleash the captive, mind-controlling cosmic being, Starro, on the world. Amanda Waller is surprisingly fine with this, as it will destabilize Corto Maltese, which actually benefits the US. However, the squad decide to rebel against Waller and take on Starro anyways, because they're like, we should save these people, a lot of these people are innocents. Thanks to a combination of commitment and luck, they manage to defeat Starro, but as Starro and all their offspring lay dying, Starro broadcasts their last thoughts, reminiscing on what their life was like prior to being taken captive on Earth. I was happy, floating, staring at the stars.
Okay, so spoilers for The Boys comic book series, which finished in 2012, so you've had over 10 years to get caught up. What was arguably the biggest twist of the comic came near the end of the story, in issue number 65 specifically. Luckily, this twist does not seem to be present in the show given what's already happened, but basically, it turns out that Black Noir is secretly a Homelander clone. He was created with the whole purpose of being meant to take Homelander down if he ever lost control. The problem is, Homelander enjoyed being a puppet for Vought International, and that put Homelander in their good graces, so he never ended up going rogue. This made Black Noir incredibly frustrated, as that was his life's only true purpose and he had been denied it for years and years and years. So, in the final issues of The Boys, after slowly watching Homelander grow more and more insane, he finally snapped and attacked the White House, taking out the president. This finally gave Black Noir the go-ahead to finally do what he was finally made to do finally. He shows up to go to the White House in the 65th issue, reveals himself as a clone and then goes for an absolute slogfest against the completely shocked Homelander. They quite literally rip each other to shreds, with Black Noir coming out technically on top before he stepped out onto the front lawn, missing significant chunks of his body. This is when the US military, alongside Billy Butcher, brought this insane soup to his brutal end with some final blows from Billy Butcher's crowbar and his fist.
Geist vs. Magneto has to be one of my favorite all-time short-lived and brutal villain versus villain fights. Though really, between them, it's pretty apparent that Geist is the real villain here, I think. Magneto ends up doing his best to catch Geist and ends up running into him after he escapes punishment in Terra Verde in the late 80s Wolverine series. Magneto lures Geist out with a little mechanical toy and makes short work of him. While his fate isn't explicitly shown here, considering that Geist is a cyborg and Magneto is the master of magnetism, we can imagine how brutal this fight would be, yeah? And based on what we do see of what happens to the decoy robot toy I was talking about, it's probably not pretty whatever goes on off page.
And we aren't done with Spawn. This time we're going to issue number 322. Essentially, there was this vampire named Paul, and he had taken a girl and he had been keeping her in his house for years and years. He's truly pretty despicable, and Spawn doesn't let that kind of thing slide. Spawn's anger and rage made him so powerful that none of Paul's attempts to stop the Hellspawn even fazed him, and Al quickly incapacitated the vampire using a horrifying amount of bugs. When Paul comes back too, he is chained up and it has been 5 days since the vampire last fed. On top of that, Spawn had controlled some roaches to go inside of Paul and eat away at anything that was keeping him alive. So this guy is starving. Spawn then lets a mouse go down a very skinny hallway and informs Paul that along with the mouse there is even more food for him at the end of the hallway, and he can either go down it or stay where he is and be consumed by roaches. As you can imagine, Paul chooses the hallway, but Spawn had also removed all the spikes from his costume and put them on either side of said hallway, so Paul has to be torn to pieces if he wants to go to get to the other side, all while the bugs are coming after him. But when he finally forces his way through, Spawn is waiting there with Paul's mistreated dogs who have also not eaten in 5 days. Spawn gives Paul the key to the exit, which is back at the other end of the hallway covered in spikes and hungry insects, and needless to say, Paul doesn't make it. Capable of making any command and having the people around him go through with it regardless of the nature of the request, there's almost no one who can resist the powers of Purple Man. It makes him a truly terrifying villain, but there is at least one person who has resisted the influence of Purple Man, and his name is Victor. Victor Von Doom. I'll admit this may not be brutal in the traditional sense. In Avengers Emperor Doom by David Michelin and Bob Hall, Dr. Doom abducts the Purple Man and puts him in a psychoprism that amplifies his powers and uses him to gain mind control over the Avengers, with the plan being to then take over the rest of the world. From his prison, Purple Man curses at Dr. Doom and basically says that Doom doesn't deserve the power he is stealing from Purple Man. But don't you dare hurl such insults at Dr. Doom. Doom orders everyone else in the room to leave. He takes off his mask, removes the shield that kept the Purple Man from controlling him, and he confronts Purple Man head on. Given this massive opening, Purple Man orders Doom to be his servant. He demands he stands on his head, take a flying leap, and even hard delete himself. But by sheer force of will, Doom resists the Purple Man's commands, horrifying Purple Man into obedience, and it is awesome.
One of the most epic fights ever went down between Perpetua and the Batman Who Laughs. At the time, both of these characters were absolute powerhouses. I mean, Perpetua just naturally is, and Batman Who Laughs had the power of Dr. Manhattan at this time. In fact, he was no longer known as Batman Who Laughs, but instead had taken up the mantle of the One Who Laughs, now that he had Dr. Manhattan's power set. I guess once you have that much of a power upgrade, time to change your whole name up and just become the One. Not the Dr. Manhattan though, by the way, but instead an alternate reality version of Batman who happened to also be a version of Dr. Manhattan, because that's the whole thing basically. Despite the fact that Perpetua is one of the most powerful beings in all of the cosmos, the One Who Laughs managed to trick her into getting the crisis energy that would have powered her, putting him more on her level. Then they fought until all her power was his.
The two strongest foes Superman has ever faced are almost definitely Darkseid and Doomsday, and when they ended up fighting each other, it was absolutely nuts. In Superman/Doomsday Hunter/Prey #1, Doomsday attacks Apocalypse after returning back to life. Now once Desaad warns his master that Doomsday is demolishing the world, Darkseid decides to take matters into his own hands, and unceremoniously receives a seriously humiliating beating. Darkseid blasts Doomsday with an Omega Beam, and it does basically nothing. Doomsday then delivers a series of massive blows that makes quick work of the Tyrant. The fact that Doomsday is basically a mindless killing machine, Darkseid's manipulative fear tactics don't do diddly squat against Doomsday whatsoever. It's so bad that in the following issues, when Superman makes his way to Apocalypse with other DC heroes and attempts to defeat Doomsday once and for all, Darkseid, licking his wounds, actually agrees to help the Man of Steel stop Doomsday, with the collected group leaving Doomsday all the way at the end of time to finally defeat him.
Harley is by far one of my favorite characters over at DC Comics, which is why I thought I knew how this fight involving her would go. And not just because she is my favorite character, but also because she is extremely popular across the board. Plot armor is a real thing, my friends. Not only that, but Harley is more experienced and has accomplished impressive feats in the past, like taking out the entire Holy Trinity of the Justice League in one single fight, that I think may have even been on like one single page or something like that. It was pretty short. But that didn't guarantee her a victory this time around. The fight between Harley Quinn and Punchline, Joker's new partner in crime, was inevitable due to their shared connection to the Joker. Although, to be clear, Harley was Joker's girlfriend during her time as his partner in crime, and Punchline seemed to be more just strictly business. Some people still say that she's Joker's girlfriend, but as far as I know, I don't think she actually is. Surprisingly, despite being new, Punchline was also extremely popular and surprised readers when she seemingly handily defeated Harley Quinn in a brutal fashion, leaving her to basically die in the sewers. Don't worry though, this is Harley Quinn we're talking about, so she did survive this fight, and even for a time, a very limited time, sported a badass scar that she'd gotten from the encounter across her neck. That is, until everyone else forgot about it and it just magically vanished, because this is comics.
The question of who is stronger between the Mad Titan Thanos and the time-traveling Kang the Conqueror has been one asked for a while. They don't normally fight each other very often, and they both somewhat rely on extra items. Like, if Thanos has the Infinity Gauntlet, obviously he's got a major advantage, and when Kang doesn't have his suit, he's basically useless. But these two did actually fight each other, although I'll admit for this point they did fight each other in an out-of-continuity comic. Taking place in Avengers Mech Strike #4 by Jed MacKay and artist Carlos Magno, Kang has hooked himself up to the body of a Celestial, which gives him basically godlike levels of power. In response to that, the Avengers decide to bring in a young version of Thanos in order to face Kang. Now this Thanos comes from a time before the character becomes aware that the Avengers will be one of his main adversaries in the future. The two battle it out for about a minute, but then Kang simply grabs Thanos by the neck and forces time through his body, aging him up literally an eternity in a matter of seconds and leaving only a Thanos-sized skeleton behind.
One of my favorite, most brutal moments in all of comic book history, we are talking about the fight of Dr. Doom versus Thanos. What a fight. Now granted, these two were fighting not necessarily on the most even of playing fields, if I'm being honest. Doom at the time was considered God Emperor Doom when he ended up as the ruler of the entire multiverse for a while. This happened during Secret Wars, something we might soon be seeing coming to the MCU in some form, and probably a version of this exact Secret Wars from 2015 as opposed to the original Secret Wars or Secret Wars 2, which are both from the 80s. During Secret Wars, Doom accepted the responsibility and power needed to reshape the multiverse during the final incursions, and ended up ruling over a patchwork sort of world he had built out of the collision, with each Earth sort of inhabiting its own realm or province in this new world. One of the people who dared to try and stand up against him was Thanos. But he made quick work of the Mad Titan, thanks to Doom having absolute power here, so yeah. Didn't stand a chance. Granted, this was all part of a larger plot to topple his regime, so although Thanos lost because he was part of that plot, kind of won.
The Earth 3 Superman is a very evil version of the character. Going by the name Ultraman, he is Superman, but power obsessed, fueled by kryptonite, and an incredibly ruthless dude. In the Adventures of Superman John Kent series, Ultraman obtained a device which allowed him to drain the power of his alternate universe counterparts, and he embarked on a mission throughout the multiverse, taking out and draining every Superman that he could find. John was recruited by Earth 2 Superman to stop Ultraman, and he confronted him on Earth 49, where Ultraman overpowered John until the son of Superman unleashed a new exotic energy power which helped John knock down Ultraman before he collapsed of exhaustion. But just as Ultraman was talking about traveling to John's home universe and wiping out Lois Lane, the Superman of Earth 49 showed up, and what do you know, it was another evil Superman. The Superman of the Injustice comics and games. And that guy snapped Ultraman's neck like it was nothing, ending Ultraman once and for all right there and then. It's nuts, but it was so awesome.
Who are two of the craziest villains that you could ever imagine fighting from Marvel Comics and DC Comics? And what if I told you they did? Back in the good old days when Amalgam Comics was around, Carnage and the Joker actually ran into each other and even briefly teamed up with one another before Carnage ultimately decided the Joker was too crazy even for him. Carnage was more interested in murder and mayhem, whereas Joker was more interested in creating elaborate plots to torment his victims more slowly and kinda just making a bunch of jokes. This caused the two to turn on each other. Carnage tried to fillet Joker while Joker sneakily got away and blew up the warehouse they'd been hiding out in. Of course, this wasn't enough to destroy Carnage, but that was when Batman and Spider-Man showed up on the scene, prompting the villains to turn their fighting against the heroes instead of one another.
Following Marvel's Secret Invasion, Norman Osborn was handing control over the Avengers. Hiring a bunch of villains and giving them the iconic looks of some of the mainline Avengers, this new team of Dark Avengers became the world's premier superhero team. Now, after receiving a distress call from Dr. Doom, a member of Norman's inner circle of dastardly devils called the Cabal, Osborn led the Dark Avengers on their first mission, to save Doom and Latveria from a horde of demons led by Morgan Le Fay. While the Avengers appeared to immediately win the battle thanks to the Sentry, Morgan, being a time traveler, simply returned from the past and took out Sentry and turned Ares into stone. As more and more of the Dark Avengers fell, Osborn asked Doom to use the time machine located in his armor, bringing the two of them to 690 AD to defeat Morgan in her own era. Unfortunately, Morgan points out that Doom can't simply wipe her out since it will jeopardize the timeline and cause a paradox. So what does Doom do? He casts a spell that gets Morgan sucked up by a cauldron and sent all the way back to England, but in 1 million BC, where she has to deal with being hunted by dinosaurs and trying to survive. Dr. Doom is my favorite. I love him. He's so cool.
I feel like anytime Magneto and Red Skull clash, it's bound to be brutal due to their history. They have had a few fairly brutal encounters, and what's even more wild is that Magneto doesn't even use his magnetic powers, usually, to dispatch Red Skull. More often than not, including this time, he manages to come up with a seemingly worse punishment than that. I mean, at least if Magneto used his powers on you, it could be over quickly, although could being the important word there. But this time around, during Axis, Magneto preferred for Red Skull's demise to be, as he put it, as pure as possible, choosing to only use his fists. Number 10. Apocalypse. There is a whole reality based on the question of what would happen if Apocalypse was unable to be stopped, if he basically, just pushed through and stopped holding back. This reality is known as Earth 295, aka the Age of Apocalypse. And in this world, Apocalypse becomes pretty much inevitable thanks to the early demise of one man, Charles Xavier, aka Professor X. The reality of Age of Apocalypse just goes to show you what a force Apocalypse is, and if an alternate reality where Apocalypse literally rules the world isn't enough to convince you of how unstoppable this villain can be, you can also turn to a more recent X-Men event, 10 of Swords, aka the Otherworld Tournament. During this fight, Apocalypse faced his wife, who was possessed by Annihilation, and even against the seemingly unbeatable foe that was Annihilation, Apocalypse somehow managed to win, saving his wife and freeing her from the influence of the Golden Helm, while also saving basically all of Krakoa, mutant kind, and Otherworld. Yeah, so this wasn't his most villainous moment per se, but normally Apocalypse is a villain, and this just serves as another example to show you another time when he decided to stop holding back, so there you go. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button and turning on that bell so you don't miss out on any good old nerdy content. Number 9. Darkseid. Jack Kirby, the famed writer, artist, and comic book creator, created Darkseid, who made his first appearance in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen issue 134 in 1970. Darkseid is a tyrannical ruler of the planet Apokolips, and is depicted as a new god in his comic book appearances. His ultimate goal is to gain control over the anti-life equation and to eliminate all hope and free will in sentient beings, basically enslaving the multiverse. He is considered one of the most powerful beings in the DC universe and is known as one of Superman's most formidable enemies, and honestly, the Justice League's probably most formidable enemy. For most heroes, it's considered somewhat of an honor to have faced and beaten Darkseid one-on-one. Darkseid was originally known as Prince Euaxus, the son of Yuga Khan and Queen Hegra of Apokolips. He seized control of the planet from his older brother, Drax, by eliminating him when Drax attempted to claim the fabled Omega Force, with Euaxus betraying his brother and taking the Omega Force for himself. With his newfound power, Euaxus' skin turned to stone and he took on a new name, Darkseid. But that's not all. While he is the ruler of Apokolips, Darkseid has also succeeded in the past in conquering Earth, at least temporarily, using the anti-life equation, refusing to hold back once he had it in his possession. Number 8. Mysterio. Mysterio is a villain that is all smoke and mirrors and illusions, which makes a lot of folks consider him to be a not so real threat at times. Still, with the cinematic take on the character, we saw Mysterio almost completely dupe, I would say, the entire world. And even when he was quote-unquote defeated, he still kind of did just that. His plan here was to convince everyone he was a hero and win them over to his side, and even when he seemingly perished, he actually still managed to succeed in this goal. In the Old Man Logan universe, Mysterio is also the one behind defeating all, get that, all of the X-Men by tricking Wolverine into thinking all of his friends were really supervillains, thereby getting him to kill the entire X-Men team and school. Yikes. In other words, just because something isn't real doesn't mean that you shouldn't still maybe fear it. A great illusion obviously can be more persuasive in some cases than reality itself, especially if you can't see reality because Mysterio's creating an illusion. Number 7. Hecate. While they may have not known it at the time, Hecate was also a very powerful Justice League foe. Here, interactions with the Justice League and her manipulation of them were not even recognized by the JLA themselves, but instead were taken note of by Justice League Dark, which is basically like Justice League, but they just do magic stuff and they work in the basement. Hecate would threaten the very makeup of the universe when she refused to hold back in the pages of Justice League Dark. And, you know, she almost won, so gotta take that into account. Number 6. Dr. Octopus. Dr. Octopus is a villain who might be well respected among Spider-Man fans, but on a greater scale, he's not likely someone you think of when you think of like a global level supervillain threat. When you think of someone who's, I don't know, unstoppable, who doesn't, you know, hold back. Usually we think of him as being a little bit more reserved. But while he might not share the status of comic book villains like Doctor Doom, it doesn't mean that he doesn't deserve to instill that level of fear among the superhero community. After all, when Doc Ock chose to stop holding back, oh, and he did, when he lay on his deathbed, he was able to seemingly do something most villains have struggled for years to do: permanently defeat Spider-Man by tricking him into swapping bodies with him, which is pretty crazy. And then for a while we thought Spider-Man was literally gone, but he wasn't, because comics. Number 5. Upside Down Man. While not officially stated as such, the Upside Down Man is kind of godlike in his appearance in DC Comics. He is, I would say, the dark reflection of Hecate, who is quite dark herself, clearly, so that's saying something, as she is considered to be a goddess and powerful witch. So I think this means we can basically consider him to be at a god level or beyond, honestly, when he wants to be. And of course, Upside Down Man proved how brutal he could be when he chose to attack all of reality, threatening to devour the entire multiverse in Justice League Dark. Number 4. Chthon. For those who are not familiar, Chthon is often attached to Scarlet Witch in Marvel Comics, and is a demonic elder god, one of the oldest entities in the Marvel Universe. He is the one who is often believed to have granted Scarlet Witch her chaos magic abilities, and has been known from time to time to possess Wanda, as such, using her as his host. While Doctor Strange has faced and defeated Chthon before, there have been times when the villain has proven to be even too powerful for other super powerful magic users to handle, like Doctor Strange, and even himself often a villain, Doctor Doom. At one point, Chthon threatened to bridge the gap between his realm and Earth, using the Darkhold as a kind of bridge. He assumed a physical form and threatened to basically conquer Earth. The only one who was able to stop him was Scarlet Witch, and even then, Wanda couldn't defeat him permanently, and instead kept him imprisoned within his own book, the Darkhold, which she keeps basically within herself, using the text in Chthon to basically bolster her own power. I'm sure nothing can go wrong with that, right? Number 3. Anti-Monitor. The Justice League has many powerful villains, but the Anti-Monitor is one of honestly the most terrifying. His control of the antimatter universe and the ability to threaten the multiverse make him an unstoppable force. During Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Anti-Monitor refused to hold back and caused massive, and I mean massive, destruction, as his determination to end everything terrified readers. Even after his defeat, the threat remained, as Necron held his body, taking it and actually repurposing it to be used as a power source for the Black Central Power Battery. I mean, Black Lanterns are not good, they are bad guys, but at the end of the day, you have to admit at least they're good at recycling. Number 2. Enchantress. Oddly enough, despite both being very much tied to the world of magic over at Marvel Comics, Enchantress doesn't often get to face off against people like the Sorcerer Supreme of Earth, which you would think she would because she's a very magical villain and he's a very magical hero. However, during the Acts of Vengeance crossover event, she did end up getting matched up for battle with him in his series, Doctor Strange Sorcerer Supreme. In issue number 12, we see these two face off, and Enchantress, along with Executioner, proves to be actually too much, even for Doctor Strange to handle, which might surprise you, but that's how it went. First of all, he is successfully seduced into attending a meeting with Amora the Enchantress in the evening, not even seemingly recognizing her as the Enchantress previous to her reveal. Then they begin to battle, and Enchantress and Executioner's Asgardian heritage makes them seemingly too much for Strange to handle. Fortunately, Clea shows up just in time to save his magic butt, but as with many other superhero battles against Enchantress, Strange honestly got lucky. I feel like a lot of people get lucky when they fight Enchantress because she is always a powerhouse and she often does not hold back, to be real with you. Number 1. Batman Who Laughs. Although he may currently be defeated in the comics, make no mistake that the Batman Who Laughs remains one of the most terrifying characters to come out of DC Comics' Dark Multiverse. I miss the Dark Multiverse. Batman Who Laughs hails from Earth -22 and is a version of Bruce Wayne who ended up being turned insane by exposure to the Joker venom. When Batman Who Laughs stops holding back, you honestly better watch out. Batman Who Laughs would serve Barbados, the Bat God, and later go on to ally himself with and later even betray, if you can believe it, Perpetua, revealing the whole time that he actually planned to conquer the multiverse himself, so he might shape it in his own image, becoming one of the most feared villains in all of DC's history. You know that you're a crazy villain when you're just like betraying villains like left and right and being like, oh, this was actually part of my plan the whole time, to go with you, betray you, and then take over the multiverse.